Good afternoon. Welcome, and glad you're here. I didn't realize it was the actually first annual, so not only is it the first time, but I think it's showing commitment there that it'll be more than a first time. And so, good to see many of you. I saw some of you in the Design Thinking seminar last year, and then also in a class I held in Pratt called Designing Customer Experiences. So good to see you as well. And so, very happy to be here. And so, wanted to, being asked to talk about something near and dear to my heart, design. It's really hard to say no. And so, once again, glad I'm here, and I'm glad to talk with you today. I wanted to start my talk a little bit going back to the beginning. And so, what we think of the beginning, we're going to go back about 80,000 to 100,000 years. And so, this is where we think mankind got and humankind got its start in Eastern Africa. And so over time, they were able to till the land, take a look at the land, able to get game. They worked their way up into what's now, in the Euphrates Valley, sort of in what's called now Mesopotamia. And the first, kind of world's first great civilizations were born. And mankind was different than the other hominids and others that ultimately went extinct. We were successful where many other very similar types of animals were not successful. And so certainly we were able to, in many, many ways, take in the world around us and adjust that world. And so we started our way and were successful because in a sense we were designers. We were able to assess the situation around us and modify it in ways that were to our personal benefit. If we didn't like the climate, we could move. If it's too arid, we could eventually find water and irrigation. If there are, this pride of lions over on the other side of the savannah, we could avoid them. And so, as we think about, where we started, we're successful for many, many reasons. And one of the things we're able to do, if you think about how data is used, at one hand, at very minimum, we're taking in data in the world around us. And you'd even think higher up in the stack, information. We were able to find out, the hot and cold, warm and dry, safe and unsafe, and be able to act upon that. And so we could turn that data into information, and then ultimately we can make that actionable. You could use that definition of knowledge, is that you take that data, be able to move it up and use it in more useful ways. And what we could say is also we gained wisdom. We learned how to more efficiently and more wisely apply the knowledge that we had. And so very much so earned the name that we're known by as Homo sapiens, which is wise person. And so this wisdom, for many, many reasons in our success, is well earned. There's many authors out there and philosophers, Nietzsche and others, who are making sort of a separate case. While we may have started out as Homo sapiens, the wise person, we're in fact morphing into something far different, and this is what they call Homo fabricus, which is the maker or the artisan. And so not only is it sufficient for us to use wisdom, we started to make tools. We started to change in more profound ways as it's playing out today in this century, changing the tools and literally the world around us through the application of tools. And so this name of Homo fabricus, this idea of the artisan and the maker actively changing the world around us. Obviously this has positive effects, and there are negative effects certainly on how we affect the world around us. But nevertheless, we are making those changes. And so whether you believe we're still Homo sapiens or we're something far different and advanced, we are changing the world around us. There's a great quote, as we've used these tools and as we have changed that world around us, there's an educator by the name of John Culkin that said, and made this observation, as have others, that we shape our tools. We as humans make the tools that make the world around us. However, in turn, there's a feedback loop where over time, thereafter, the tools make us. And so I'll give you a couple examples of how that might be. And so I'm going to give you also a quick editorial. This is my editorial. So not only do we make tools, we make processes. So we make implements, but we also have the how and the why behind those implements as well. So there's tools and processes that we use around us and change the world. I'll give you a personal example here. I've been collecting guitars for a long time. I play guitar, and this is one of my guitars, 1963 Fender Jaguar. And there's all sorts of, anytime you collect anything, there's always provenance. There's all this meaning around the object. You could think of this as a tool. I derive benefit from playing. I enjoy tuning it and maintaining it. It's an old instrument. It needs maintenance and so forth. And so I've changed it and maintained it as well. But it's also changed me in addition to giving me. So I play left-handed. And my left hand, so I'm asymmetric now because of my tool, and so my left hand reaches about 1.5 inches to 2 inches further than my right hand. So I strum with this hand, I do chords with this one. So over time, my tool has changed me and made me asymmetrical, and so that's actually a good thing, and even though it sounds a little bad. But ultimately, as you look through, whether it's a guitar or other implements, you can see other examples of this everywhere you go. I love going to old antique shops and seeing old tools, just for the craftsmanship that went into them. But as you can see on the handle here, after years of use, this was probably a spade or a shovel of some sort, you can see the wear pattern where the user over time wore the tool down. You can imagine in kind on that user's hand was a series of calluses or something that happened to their hand as they used this tool. So very much they used their tool and their tool ultimately made them. Also on guitar, I have a set of calluses on my fingers that I don't have on my right hand and my left from fretting and doing the strings as well. So I've worn up a protective layer on this hand that doesn't exist on my right hand as well. And so as you think of the physical tools, we have this sort of symbiotic relationship of how we change each other. However, it's not just physical. The tools we used have become more sophisticated. We're not just having a plow tilling the ground and hoping that the harvest will come in. We have those physical tools, but also we have tools that change us in a behavioral fashion. How we get satisfaction, how we use those tools, how we respond to tools. We get mad at our computers, right? We treat inanimate objects as animate things. So you go, you darn computer, your computer is out to get you, or your smartphone is out to get you. So essentially you make human these inanimate objects in our frustration. So there are behavioral changes and also cognitive changes. If you look at social media, other tools that we have today, whether it's physical, behavioral, cognitive, we have made those tools and ultimately they're affecting and they're making us as well. And so what I wanted to talk a little bit for my thesis of my talk today is to think a little bit about this idea of how we think of design thinking as one of the tools that we have created. There's a lot of hype and hubbub around design thinking as a tool, but I think we're doing ourselves a disservice if we merely think of design thinking or the model for design thinking as a tool, as a spade or a hoe or a shovel. It's more than a tool. It's actually a tool that will modify us in use. Just like the calluses on my hand for a guitar, just like the wear probably created those same types of calluses from that shovel that I showed a couple slides back. This idea of using design thinking as some sort of implement, I think, is limiting, and we need to think of it in a larger context. And so what I've used, as I've used sort of design thinking sort of well before it was defined as design thinking, I've found that there's been changes not only in me, like the guitar has changed me, but also design thinking has changed a lot of my colleagues as well as they've used it. When I worked at IDEO, I'm at Cisco now. I could see that once again, that relationship between creating this tool that we call design thinking and how design thinking in turn, and I think in many favorable ways, changes us as well. And so what I wanted to offer today was my 3 observations. So 3 ways that I've seen that when you take design thinking and perhaps not consider it just a tool, think of it the way it can influence you and influence you to the better. I'm going to offer these 3 up. I think it changes us in many more ways, but I think these are some fundamental ways, and I think these are kind of promises. I think if you use this design thinking model, use it over time, I think you'll find as well. One of those benefits is what I would call being attuned to thoughtless acts. And so when I say the word thoughtless, I don't mean in any negative sense. I mean, it's the things we do automatically without thinking. It's a response we have to and how we use and misuse the environment around us. There was a really smart woman by the name of Jane Fulton Surrey I worked with at IDEO, and she has a small book called Thoughtless Acts, and these are some photos from that book. And what she did was just be attuned to the little ways that people modify their world around them. The little slip of paper, because somebody didn't have the correct change, explaining why they were parking where they were, and they stuck that in the parking meter. The woman who maybe ties up their hair with a pencil is the only thing they had to do that. Why people walk on lines that are printed on the ground when they don't have to. And all sorts of other areas where you find just little ways that we use, modify, and improve the world around us without even thinking. And so one of the things I've started to do, and it just seemed like a natural act, is I take photographs of those little thoughtless acts, either on my own or things I find along the way. And so which came first, design thinking or that practice? I'm not sure, but I think there was a little bit of the chicken and the egg. Is when I started to think in a different way, I started to pay attention and want to retain those different things and about thinking differently. And so here's just a picture of her book. The book's really small. It's this tiny little book, but it's all it is pictures, just a wonderful thoughts from a woman who's looking at the world and seeing the thoughtless acts that are there. Here's one at Cisco. This is one I found walking between meetings. And what this is a hand sanitizer unit on the wall outside a meeting room. And it has what a human factor person would call the perfect affordance. It has this little hand held out, and it's really nominally there to prevent the drips coming and hitting the ground if people have the foam or the gel that comes out. Somebody had been drinking a coffee, they put the cream in the coffee, and they put the little creamer right in the little hand that was held out to take it. So it wasn't supposed to be there, but it was just a little clue, or what we call an affordance of just a nice little opportune place to put that. Here's a picture of my car going into the Bryan Center over by Pratt. And so you've got this ticket, you don't want to lose it, you're going to need it in an hour or so, what do you do with it? And so I put it in the nice little slot that was absolutely not made for the ticket into the heater vent. And so I just slide it right in there. It works every time. I've never lost a ticket, and it's always right where I expect it to be when I came back. And so that was my little thoughtless act that made my world just a little bit easier as well. I think as you use design thinking, as you go through this idea of interpreting the world, iterating, preserving ambiguity, all of the tenets that are part of design thinking, I think you'll find you'll start to do this automatically. And the other part is when you start to do it automatically, you'll start to care about it more, and it becomes more of who you are. And then you become a person who is attuned then to seeing these thoughtless acts as well. Second area I wanted to cover is, and I think some other speakers are going to talk about this as well, is this idea of visualization and telling a great story. And so I think I kind of knew this early on, but I don't know that I would have seen the power that when you can tell a story that is visual and compelling, the power it can have to move audiences in a direction. And so here's just a great picture from Albrecht Dürer of, it's really just doing what it was a very early example of perspective. And so he's picking, I think it's a lute or lyre there, and using visual techniques. And so they found over time, as we went from essentially flat hieroglyphics to the Renaissance, we saw the Da Vinci's and others, these artists that could use this newfound technique called perspective, that we could render the world in just beautiful detail, almost photorealism in many effects. And so very early on, we were a visual being. Here are some cave drawings. These are probably from 30 to 40,000 years ago. And so the cave drawings were not necessarily, they were absolutely a language. There was no spoken language back then, maybe grunts or other pointing, maybe some things like that, we don't know. But this is where the best game was. This is where to avoid the jaguar in the tree, all the threats that are out there. And you would tell your friends and tell your neighbors, you keep your family safe, you keep them fed, you would keep them growing through this pictorial language. And somewhere along the way, as we got our verbal language, a little bit of this went by the wayside, which is unfortunate. It's a very powerful language to be able to tell a visual story. In fact, if you go in any culture just about in the world, we are storytellers as humans. And so if you go to India, you go to China, you go anywhere in the US or Europe, we love to tell stories, and we still have a storytelling culture that's still there. People love to sit around a fire, sit around food, and just tell a story, reminisce. It resonates in a very human way and very natural way that sometimes we've forgotten in sort of the instant feedback that we have with the Facebooks and the Twitters. And there's a deep resonance and a deep satisfaction you can get with just sitting down with a friend and telling a great story. Maybe the visual is just a very simple storyboard. This is from a cartoon. It might be just a little sketch. Might be just a little edge of a napkin. It might be, here's a prototype I built for work. It might be just a little 3D printed prototype that allows me to explain a concept just a little bit better. And so whatever the media is, your voice, your cave paintings, physical prototype, there is a power in being able to tell a great story. And so that power really derives from this I think a capability you have is to move an audience. And so whether you have an audience that is there for a business presentation, technical or others, they're in some sort of present state. And what you can do is take them what we would call a could-be state. You have this idea that you can say wherever they are today, you can move them in whether it's 5 minutes, 7 minutes, an hour, maybe it's a long conversation on the beach that goes for hours. somewhere you're able to move that audience in a direction that is desirable. And so visual storytelling has that power, and design thinking can help tune you into that power as well. Finally, and so I want to talk a little bit, just briefly, this idea of sort of present to future, the state A to state B. In the business world, once again, academia, maybe you want to move an audience from they're unfamiliar on some concept. Maybe they don't know what design thinking is and you want to make them aware. Perhaps they're passive. They're not particularly interested in what you have to say and you want to make them an active advocate. That's your goal as part of your story. Maybe they just don't care. And that's hard if you have an audience that just doesn't care. But maybe you can make them care and say some sort of relevance in some way. And finally, maybe you've got the devil's advocate or the skeptic in the audience and you want to turn them not only just to neutral but into an actual believer. The power of visual story can do all of these things, but you have to do it very prescriptively and with intent. But using those multi modes of your voice, images, prototypes, so to tell that visual story. And then finally, this is the one where this is my favorite. I use this in my class. Is if you don't believe in the power of visualization, this is a sign. This is a sign in Palo Alto outside a design agency. Is don't park here is a great sign, but visualize being towed is the best. And so, as soon as you see the sign, you see that your car going off in the distance behind the tow truck, and where are you going to get the $350, and how are you going to go? How are you going to get to the garage? All the things flood in there of what being towed. And so, as far as I know, they never had somebody parking in their spaces. This tended to work. Final, what I want to talk about, this third, thing you can become is often you can just what I would call seize the opportunity for simple delights. And what this is, in addition to the thoughtless acts, there's little things in the world around us, things that you can create, things that other people have created, that are just simple, what I would call simple delights that just make your life a little easier and solve, in many cases, a problem you didn't even know you had. This is my friend Peter Pietz. He's in Estonia, of all places. And he's at a theater house, and this is printed on the mirror is how to do a half Windsor knot tie. And so for the price of just a little bit of paint and a little bit of a stencil, you can make sure that you're ready for the opera or for the symphony. And so they even did you a favor by putting a sign there as well. So I did not know what Pulik Winsori Psalm is, but I know what a half Windsor knot is. And just a small thing that they did. This was at not too long ago, a hotel I stayed at, and they forced you to get you had to do valet parking, so I was not pleased about that. It's expensive, but they made it really easy for you to get your car. You essentially put your smartphone at the ticket. You didn't have to call anybody, and your car showed up 5 minutes later. So somebody just made that little leap between not having to do a phone call or not having to go to the concierge and making that very easy for you. These were just some little things I kept as well from a hotel in Hong Kong. Just wishing me a good night and letting me know what the weather was going to be the next day. And in one case, they actually put an umbrella in my room because it was going to be raining that next day. So it's just that little thought, and then they also had a little sticky on the sticky note on the mirror where it just said, welcome, use this for 20% off in our lounge as well. Just those little thoughts. There's counterexamples to this as well. I love signs like this as well. Something happens when you lock this door. I don't know what it is, but it's a bad thing. And so the first sign was, please only lock, do not twist, thank you. Apparently that was not impactful enough, so they put please read next to it. So I love this sign. And sometimes there's going to be a please read sign. So at some point there'll be a third one. I'll do a larger photo. And I want to close on just an experience, finally, the small things as well, and sort of the power of these small delights. This is Santa Cruz, California. So I grew up about a half hour from Santa Cruz. And some of my earliest memories are my dad taking me into the water in Santa Cruz. And you have visions of California water being nice and warm. It's not. It's where it's 50, 55 degree water. So I had my little wetsuit on, and my dad was dragging me out into the water, and I loved it. And so after we would go to the beach and kind of go surfing and doing things like that, I'd always bug him, I want to go to the boardwalk. And so this was built I think in the 30s, is this boardwalk with all these rides and so forth. And one of the things I loved from the boardwalk was the carousel. And so there's this carousel that was built in the late 20s. And what you can do is you go around, and you can see him just about to get this little ring. And so there's these little iron rings that you can pluck off there, and then you throw into the clown's face. And I can remember being on this when my arm was too short to to get these iron rings, and my dad would do that for me. He's sitting by me. So it's the little mementos. I keep these little things. So I stole one. So yes, I did steal one. But it's not just an iron ring. It's this iron ring that has, a lifetime of memories. And so it's really, thinking of the power of these sort of small delights. Some of them are, some are just, merely in the moment, beautiful things, just making your life a little bit easier. Some are far more meaningful. And so something simple as a little iron ring as well can also have sort of family memories attached with it as well. So don't discount the power of those simple delights. They are simple, yes, but they're also delightful. And ultimately, you as a designer can make a choice and use those as part of what you produce as well. So, as you think of those three things, I'm hoping as you leave this, maybe if the only thing you remember from my talk is design thinking. There's a lot of hype. It's a great tool, but it's an even better tool that makes you, and if you let it. And so once again, you're going to hear from some other great speakers here today. They're going to approach that sort of model in very different ways, very different aspects. But listen to what they have to say. Think about how you can employ it in your life. I guarantee as you use design thinking, it's going to influence you and change you as well. So thank you again for your time, and I'll stick around after if you have any questions as well. So thank you.